Welcome back. In this episode, I'd like to talk to you about accessories. Those are the little knickknacks that make or break a portrait that are not clothing items. So if we're saying shirts and tops and bottoms and trousers and skirts and dresses are clothing items, then things like glasses and earrings and necklaces and armbands and those types of things, nose rings, earrings and all that, those are classed as accessories, and they work a little bit different than clothing items. I mean, they can work exactly like clothing items, but often they're not. So technically there are three types of accessories that we commonly come across. And we need to know and recognize which one's which so that we can adequately adjust them. So I thought I'm going to dedicate a whole episode to that, and how to find them and how to sort them and how to use all these three categories. So the three types that you may come across are smart props. Those are literally like objects that slot into place, that don't have rigging, and they'll auto-parent themselves to the position where they need to go. So like a wristband would go and parent itself to the wrist of a character, or an earring would parent itself to the head of the character, that sort of thing. But they commonly don't have rigging themselves. Then the second category are rigged props that work very much like smart props, but they have rigging internally. So you might be able to adjust things with the rotational tools that we've come across from adjusting a character's shoulder, for example. And then the third type of accessory that we may come across are fully rigged accessories. And they behave much like clothing items, which is often overkill in things like accessories, but there's no right or wrong way to do this. There's also no guidelines on how to do this. So some creators choose to fully rig accessories and then remove bones from it. The advantage is that they will follow a character's movements, like a hat would always stay on the head of a figure. But the trouble is that they're not that easily adjustable. But I'll show you how to do this. Let's have a look at all three of them, one by one, and introduce you to my trusty assistant here, which is Go Luck by Rarestone and Nirvana. She's wearing the trending socials top, and she will be our model for this session. Let me show you where accessories are. In the Smart Content tab, you won't be surprised to find them under Accessories. In the regular content library, they're just regular items that come as part of the product, so they're not separated out as something special. But in the Smart Content tab, they are, and I'm very grateful for that. So we have these two options that when we're on accessories, we can either look at the products that contain accessories alongside other items, or we can look at files that'll show us anything in our library that is tagged as an accessory. So this is now all the accessories across anything that's installed in my library. So hats and glasses and masks and all that. If I wanted to filter this out, and I'm thinking I'm only looking for glasses right now, I'll type in glasses, and then I find a selection of glasses from varying products. Oh, this one's nice. Cyberpunk goggles, they're very cool. Or if I'm looking for something like an armband, I can type in arm and then I'll see this, or I'm typing in something like a necklace and then I find all the necklaces that I have installed. So this is how that works on the Files tab. I'm going to go back to the Products tab and pick one that I know is a smart prop, and that is from this here, the Glasses Set 1 for Genesis 8 and 8.1. I'll open that up and I can see there's one for the male figure, one for the female figure. I'm just going to go and double click the one for the female figure, and that'll go and slot right into place on my model's head here. I can see that it might need a little bit of adjustment. No, actually we're good. We're good. It's actually looking good, so I don't need to make any adjustments. But if I needed to do that, I'll show you where to make that happen. If I look into my Scenes tab, I can currently see that aside from whatever she's wearing, I don't seem to see the glasses. And that is because if I go and right-click and select eyeglasses, you'll see that they have auto-parented themselves to the head object of my character here. So this is where they are. This is why I didn't see them. So if I wanted to drill down and open up my character in the Scene tab, I'd have to go all the way down to the head so that I can find them. And you can see by the symbol here, which is kind of a box icon, that this is a regular object that has no rigging. So in this case, I know it's a smart prop because it has automatically parented itself to this point. This happens during the creation process of the prop. So you'd import the object in, you'd set up the materials, and then you save it out and give the file information as to where it needs to be parented to, so that when the figure is loaded again and you load in that same prop, it knows, hey, I was parented to something called head, I need to go and put myself into this place. If you'd save it as a regular prop, then it wouldn't have that information. So that's why it's smart. It pops into place. It doesn't just load into the scene. It recognizes there's a figure in place and I need to look for something, you know, called an arm or a head, depending on what needs to happen there. But other than that, this symbol shows me it is an unrigged item, which is good to know. It's the simplest one that we can use. In order to make adjustments here, I can literally go and select it and see where the manipulator is. It's usually somewhere around that item, which is important to remember because not all props work that way. So I can go and just adjust it. If I needed to move that forward or back or whatever, I can do that and it'll go and stay in place. Or if I go and move my character's head, it won't be by itself because it's parented to that particular item. If I go and just to prove a point, if I go and move the head of the figure, then the glasses move with it, which is kind of what we expect. So that's good to know. I might go and switch the figure to base resolution just so that my computer works a little bit faster during the demo here. If we wanted to make adjustments to the item, we need to go and select it first. So either find it in the Scenes tab or right click on the item and then select it from here, directly from the viewport. And then, just like we know from clothing items, head over to the Parameters tab. And then under here, we'll have an Actor tab. And under Actor, we will have something like Adjustments. And this now lets me adjust properties of my smart prop with morph targets, so with deltas, like we know from clothing. So we have something like arms out here. If I left click and drag that, then this happens here, the arms come out. And then I have also something called the arms go up. Maybe I can see that better from a different perspective here. So if these arms now intersect with my figure's head, I can go and make these adjustments here. Adjust front. So this is a good prop, so I don't have to worry about where the manipulator is. I can just go and make these adjustments here, adjust the width. So this, I wish all props had that. And remember, you can also go and remove the limits here if you need to do that. Adjust the temples, that's here. So there's a lot of adjustments here. Fit morphs for Aiko and Charlotte. And so this is where you'd find adjustment options for smart props, if they're there. So not every smart prop has that. But yes, in principle, just like before, select the item, then head over to the Parameters tab. Under Actor, you'd find something like Adjustments, and that makes these adjustments. Let me go and remove these. Select my figure here, top item of my figure, and show you the second category, which is now a rigged prop. So that's also going to be a glasses prop, just sticking with glasses here. If I have a look further in my library, that's these ones here, all style glasses for Genesis 8 males and females, part of a Start Picks bundle. I'll give you links to all these products in the PDF that accompanies this series. And much like before, we have several types of glasses to choose from here. These are different models. I'm going to go and choose maybe this one here. Yeah, this one. We can see that better. Nice rim, I have to say. Very cool. So these are our glasses now. Much like before, they have also auto smart parented themselves to the head of the figure. And the good thing is, once again, that we can select our figure here with the glasses will stay with the figure as she moves her head. So that's all perfect. That's exactly what we want. But if I select them, I can see that the logo here is slightly different. So it's no longer a box icon. It's kind of a 3 box icons with a little arrow next to it. And this tells me that while this is a smart prop, this is a rigged prop. So the cool thing about this is that if I open this up, I can see that there's a bone hierarchy in here. So we have default and then we have left and right. And this is a little bit like the figures themselves. This will allow me to make adjustments to this prop, not just with morph targets, which might still be there, but also with my regular manipulator. So I'm thinking if we have left and right, and I'm looking at where these things, where my manipulator happens to be, if I do that, it looks like they're going to let me adjust this with the rotational options here. So I can go and make adjustments like this, but not every prop will allow me to do that. So take a look at the icon that comes with your prop. So if it looks like this here, then this means this is a rigged prop. It has some kind of rigging in it. This is custom rigging, which is great. I appreciate that when clothing creators do that. It takes a lot of work to get that right, but it does make our posing life a lot easier. So it kind of depends on, yeah, look at that. I can go in all kinds of directions here. I can go up and down, and this is kind of nice. So these are not morph targets. This is actually changing the geometry with bones. If I select my glasses, I can head over to the parameters tab, and there's also an adjustment option here, but it looks like there's not that much to adjust here. So I have one morph target, which is the Genesis 8 male adjust, so this just fits the different type of facial shape, but that is really all I have. The rest is done with rigging inside the figure. I also have my manipulator, which is at the front here, so if I needed to make an adjustment to move the glasses forward or whatnot, I can just still do that. But it's very different to the previous smart prop that we had a look at. So, you know, really depends on how these things come. This is a rigged prop. Let me show you the third type of accessory, which I think is the most complex, and that is a fully rigged prop. I'll go and delete this one here, select my figure again. And these are not glasses that I'm going to show you now. These come as part of an outfit, namely this one here, the D-Force Abby outfit. And we're not going to use the whole outfit. I'm going to focus on the hat that the figure is wearing. So hats are kind of tricky because they not only do they need to fit a figure, they also usually need to fit hair underneath it. We're not going to talk about that here, just about the fact that this is a fully rigged accessory, and we'll talk about fitting a hair slightly later in this course. So if I go and double click that, I can see that the hat slots itself onto the head of the figure, and if I go into my Power Pose tool, with my figure now selected, I can see that when I move her head around, the hat moves with it. This is kind of what I'm expecting. So that's all good. So far, no issues there. But if I go and look into my scene hierarchy, I can see that the hat is not parented to the head of the figure. It is a standalone item, much like an item of clothing that is just parented to the top node of the character. And this is usually a giveaway that we're dealing with a fully rigged prop. And in fact, if I go and drill into this, I can see that the hat in fact has a hip, which is bizarre because the hat is here and the hip is kind of here. So that's an interesting fact. If I drill down into the hip, then we have the pelvis, the abdomen lower, much like in the regular Genesis figure. We've got the abdomen upper, chest lower, chest upper, and then we have the neck lower, neck upper, and then we have the head, and then that is literally all the rigging of the Genesis figure, except for the arms and all that. So they do this because there's a tool in DAZ Studio called the transfer utility. And that's a kind of an interesting tool that lets us transfer the full rigging of the Genesis figure into an unrigged item. And it makes it really easy for clothing creators to get started with rigging and with weight maps and all that. Those are really complex processes that need to happen so that clothing can follow the movements of a figure. And this is employed in the hat here as well. As I said, it's a little bit overkill because we don't really need all that rigging in the figure. Nevertheless, it is a valid way of creating an accessory like this. Sometimes you'll see this in glasses as well, even earrings I've seen this in, which is total overkill, but hey, it's one of those things. We as users of such items need to know how to deal with that. So the problem here is that I currently don't see a manipulator when I look at the hat. So if I need to make an adjustment, which it looks like I do need to make, maybe I want to change the position of the hat, maybe I want to tilt it slightly, or I want to, move it up because there's a hair in the way or whatnot. I can see there's no manipulator here, and that is because the manipulator is in fact at the very bottom of the figure. This is in the same place that the manipulator for the Genesis figure is, so that kind of lines up. But the problem is, of course, if I do select my hat and I go and zoom in on it, and if I'm thinking I want to make this go up a little bit so that it doesn't interfere with her hair, there's no real way to do this other than going over to the parameters tab and then heading over to the translational property and then using the Y translate. Maybe I could do that. But if I move that, I can see that the value is moving, but the hat itself isn't moving. And that's a problem because even though the hat moves when I move the figure, the hat doesn't move independently of that. And it's also true if I go and zoom out, select the hat, and then try to move the manipulator, left click and drag, the manipulator appears to move, but the hat does not. So let me show you how to work around this. So the first thing that we can do is we can move the manipulator into place so that it's closer to where the hat is. And that's number one. Number two is, how do we make the hat movable? So let's talk about these two things. The first one is how to adjust this pivot point. Wherever the manipulator shows up is the origin point or the pivot point in an object. So we have that with primitives as well, and usually the pivot point being at the bottom of a figure is exactly where we want it. But with an accessory or something else, that might not be what we want. Sometimes we might also want the manipulator to be in a different position. So this is how we can adjust it. Usually, there's this thing here on the top that's called the Joint Editor tool. Thankfully, we have it on our little toolbar. Just in case you don't have it, you can get it from here, Tools, and then pick the Joint Editor. Alt-Shift-J is the default shortcut key. But thankfully, we have it here, so I can just go and select it from here. And if I go and do that, I can see the rigging in the particular figure. So in this case here, with my hat selected, I can see the bones that are left over of the rigging of the Genesis figure. If I were to select my Genesis figure, I'll see the whole rigging here, so all the bones that go through the figure. It's kind of interesting to look at these things. So, you know, I encourage you to not so much adjust the bones, but just have a look at how the bones are created here. So I'll go and select my hat again. And with that hat, I can now see that not only have I got the bones, I've also got these two little icons here. One is green and one is red. So they look like a version of my manipulator, but I have two of them, and they usually denote the beginning and the end of a bone. So it being the Joint Editor, if I go and just as an example, if I go and select one of these bones here, I can see that the green one denotes the kind of the start of the bone and the red one the end, or the other way around. I can never really remember, but once at one end, once at the other. And if I go and left click and drag one of these, it'll move the size of the bone. I don't want to do that here at all. I want to go and select my hat's root node again, and then zoom out slightly so that I can see the green icon here. And then I'm going to go and left click and drag the top arrow here and move it. So just the green one, leave the red one in place, and I'll go and move that to roughly where my hat is. So maybe at the top of the hat, that might be good. I could also move it to the bottom of the hat, something like that. I'm thinking maybe I'll move it to the very top, just so that I have a visual representation of where I'd like my manipulator to be. And once the green thing is in place, maybe like, maybe like this at the very top here. Remember to look at it from different directions, maybe even with different viewports. And then I'll go switch back to my universal manipulator and watch what happens. I see my regular manipulator now in the correct position, or rather in the position that I've just moved my green manipulator from the Joint Editor to. So that is good, because this is more relevant to where I might be adjusting the hat. I'm not adjusting it 6 feet away from it. I'll adjust it right here. Control F will frame that up. Try this trick on anything that needs its origin or pivot point adjusted, or wherever the manipulator needs to show up. Joint Editor, move the green little icon, then switch back to the universal manipulator, and your origin point should have changed. Usually. It doesn't always work, just to warn you there. It's always like that with 3D, isn't it? It doesn't always work. But even with my manipulator in place, I still can't move the hat. So I can still move the manipulator, but the hat doesn't move. So that is now puzzle number 2, still with the hat selected. On the Parameters tab, have a look at the MISC category here. This is usually how it works. There's a Fit To option here, and there's a Fit To mode. And we haven't really spoken about either of them, and I thought maybe we can do that in the same swoop here. So first of all, in order to move the hat, let's change the Fit To mode from Redirect Transforms to Auto Follow Transforms. And when I do that, I can go and left click and drag my manipulator, and I see that my hat moves. So any accessory that gives you grief that can't be moved, move it that way. That will certainly work. So that's puzzle number 1 solved. What is Fit To? I mean, thankfully it now goes and fits this item to my character here, Gao Luck, which is nice, but I could fit it to something else, including none. And this is something that is important for clothing, and the hat, it behaves like clothing, so it's made like clothing, hence it applies to this as well. This will tell an item of clothing which other item to follow. So it's telling the clothing, look at another skeleton, you have the same skeleton, and look at what that skeleton does and do the same thing. That's essentially what it does. And this is usually enabled automatically. So when you select the figure and then you load in a wardrobe item, this is usually acknowledging that. So it looks as, hey, is there a figure in the scene? Then auto fit yourself to that. But if there isn't a figure in the scene and you load the item of clothing first and then you load a figure, then the clothing doesn't really know about the figure because it was loaded first. So in that case, you can select the item of clothing and then go and say fit to the figure. It's kind of a retrofitting, if you will. So DAZ Studio these days does a really good job at doing this automatically. It wasn't always the case. We had in previous years, like I'm talking 10 years ago, we always had to set this manually on items of clothing. Thankfully, we don't anymore. And even if the figure is not selected and you load an item of clothing, DAZ Studio does a pretty good job at fitting the clothing to that anyway. Just in case your clothing doesn't follow the figure, you move the figure and the t-shirt isn't moving, have a look at this. So under parameters, under MISC, and make sure the clothing is set to fit to the character. So in my case, I'm going to leave everything in place. I'm going to hit cancel because it's already set up. But yes, this is what that first option is for. And that's the fit to mode. If you change that to auto follow transforms, you'll be able to move an item of clothing, or in this case, an accessory, independently from the figure, if ever you needed to make that adjustment and offset something. In addition, in our case, we even have some special head morphs here. So full head morph for Eva and Freya. So if I go and left click and drag this, then you can see that the hat shapes itself into these two special characters' position already. But we also have other things like the regular adjustment morph. So if I wanted to expand the hat a little bit further, like in my case, it looks like it's popping through. Even if I had tried moving it a little bit so that this poke through doesn't happen, that might not have been successful. So I can go and expand the whole hat. That is much nicer. Remember the limits. If that is not enough for the hair underneath the hat, I can just go and crank that up, or just, under parameter settings here, just remove the limits or give it a larger limit, like, maximum maybe 500 or so. But there's all kinds of other things that you can adjust here. Usually that's, like we discussed before, in this case, reshape the hat, ears left and right and all that. So, just like on other clothing items or on other props, you have adjustment options here. That is pretty much all I can tell you about accessories. So there are three types. That's the smart props, the unrigged ones that pop into place magically. Then there's the rigged props that also pop into place magically, but they contain rigging. So most of their adjustments will be done with the universal manipulator rather than the adjustments tab on the parameter section. And then the third one, that's the most complicated one. Those are fully rigged props that more behave like clothing items, and they are usually not movable without you going into the MISC section here and then switching the fit mode to auto follow transforms. They're also in different positions. So just as a reminder, the rigged props, they will appear underneath the root node of the figure, like in this case, whereas the smart props, rigged or unrigged, will usually appear under the item of the figure that they're parented to. So in the case of glasses or hat or earrings, they'll be the head. In case of armbands, they'll be the arms, and so forth. So they'll be in different positions depending on what type of prop it is. And I thought it's important for you to understand what they are. And I felt it was important for you to understand where to look for these things and how these things operate, because, this is one of those inconsistencies that took me forever to figure out. So I'm hoping I'm giving you a leg up here. In the next episode, we're going to talk about shaders and material presets a little bit to round off our grand tour of content. Stay tuned for that.